Okay, we are live, Brendan. Whenever you want to start.
All right. I guess we'll get started then. All right. Welcome everyone to this Board of Education public hearing concerning the fiscal year 2023 budget and the 2022-2023 school year return to learn plan. The following agenda of procedure for the public hearing will provide for an orderly opportunity for each school district resident who so desires to have an opportunity to be heard in regard to the fiscal 2023 budget and the return to learn plan. So, if we could have a roll call.
Sure. Ms. Boss.
Present.
Mr. Coleman.
Present.
Mr. Guziak.
Present.
Mr. Lorenzen.
Present.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Mr. Pederini.
Present.
Ms. Roberts.
Here.
We're all here. We have a quorum.
Excellent. So we start with the presentation.
Yes, let's go to the budget presentation. I will bring it up on my screen and then Carly, if you want to lead us through it.
Sure. Ooh. Fall out of my chair first. Okay. So I was trying to be crafty and get this color scheme to match the logo. And as you'll see as we go through, it feels really 1970-ish. And then it really starts to make you want cheese. So you can see why. But okay, so this is a presentation on the tentative school budget. So this is our first, I guess, stab at it as of this time. What we know now, what we anticipate for the fiscal year 22-23 school year. If we go to the next slide, this is just the budget calendar. As many of you know, we are required by the state to submit a budget by the end of September. So this is the calendar that we must adhere to today. We're on the top row reviewing the tentative budget. Between now and September 26th, we can go over any questions you might have, comments, concerns. Tomorrow we'll post the tentative budget online and in the front offices for the public to see. A legal ad will be posted this week, letting the public know about our public budget hearing on the 26th, and then after it's adopted, it gets submitted to the state. And then the next slide is just kind of an FYI. We all know that the schools follow fund accounting. So we have 9 funds that we collect revenue and pay expenses out of. So this is just kind of a tool to refer back to if ever you have questions about what the different funds are. And then the next slide, just some overall comments that, as I mentioned before, there are a number of known costs that we have and a number of unknown costs. So we'll know that, you know, a given teacher has a specific base salary. We know that pretty much what our benefits are going to cost, and we know things like our recurring technology applications. But there are also a lot of unknown costs. So substitutes, number of staff development requests, and special ed students are just a few examples. So we make educated estimates on what we've seen in the past and what we know as of the moment. And one thing to point out here is that the culture of this district is to expend funds only when necessary. All right, now we get into the numbers. So this slide is basically showing the 9 funds, the revenue that we anticipate bringing in, and what our expenditures are going to be. And you'll see a lot of deficit numbers here, but don't be alarmed at them. They can be explained, but for the most part, in the education, operations and maintenance, debt service, and working cash funds, we have positive numbers. When we look at transportation, you see a deficit of around $80,000. That's because we are anticipating with the transportation claim that we just submitted, that we're getting about $75,000 less from the state than we did last year. The reason for that is the state prorates what the transportation claim is, and typically that could be because maybe they're anticipating they may not have enough to give, and so transportation is one of the first places they take away from. So it wouldn't be like general state aid, it's going to be transportation. Now, that doesn't mean that we truly won't get all of the revenue that, we may get more revenue than they're anticipating us getting during that first transportation claim. With Fund 50, IMRF and FICA, that is what we pay to our couple of retirement plans for some of our employees. There's a deficit there simply because the expenses that we have going out are more than the revenue that we asked for in the tax levy. That was intentional. We had a bit of a buffer already under Fund 50, and we don't want too much in Fund 50 at any given time, so we just didn't levy as much. So, and we'll see when we get to an upcoming slide here, some of these deficits will make a little bit more sense. Capital projects is another one. This is where we pay our big projects out of our big building projects. You can only have pretty much money coming into that through a tax levy or a referendum, I should say, a bond, or transfers. And so we don't have any referendum money going into that fund, but we do have some of our bigger projects that we've anticipated coming out of that fund where we already had a fund balance. So working cash is just a rainy day account, if you will. Tort is what we pay the legal expenses out of. Again, revenue 100,000, expenses we're estimating maybe a little bit more than that, but there was a positive fund balance in all of these funds as we go into the school year. And then last but not least, life safety. The revenue is very low, just over $1,000. That's because with life safety, a school district is required to come up with a 10-year life safety plan with its architects and engineers. We are at the end of that life safety plan, so we have been checking off the boxes and completing all of the projects with under that plan. So the most we could levy this year for revenue was just over $1,000. We plan on finishing up a couple of our final projects with expenses of just under $20,000. So again, some deficits here, but that's when we're just looking solely at the revenue coming in and expenses going out. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that the state, when looking at the budget and whether or not the budget is balanced, is only looking at 4 funds: education, operations and maintenance, which is buildings and grounds, transportation, and working cash. And you'll see that this very bottom row is the estimated fund balance as of June 30th, 2023. So the end of next school, or this school year. And we have a positive fund balance in all of those accounts. And we do in all 9 of the accounts. But when we submit our budget to the state, they're looking at this. You can see it says balanced budget, no deficit reduction plan is required. This is actually just a snipping tool or a snagit of an actual spreadsheet on the budget, the state budget form. So the good news is we have a balanced budget. We don't have to define a deficit reduction plan. Any questions so far?
Carly, just looking at the capital projects
Yes.
expenses, I know I saw in the notes that there's about $344,000 for it, which is, we've already reviewed. Also another line item for the HVAC upgrades at the elementary. What's the approximate amount for those upgrades?
90,000.
About 90,000.
We're looking to do that over winter break.
Okay, and then the remainder is close to 400. Is that for these anticipated projects, the other potential anticipated projects?
Right, that's a good question. So, like you were saying, we still have about probably a couple hundred to pay for the flooring that we just put in. And Jason, this is, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. There will be a little bit of, or maybe we weren't, but there will be a little bit of a buffer. And so one of the last things that I wanted to talk about in this presentation is some thoughts on how we would want to expend those funds. I know that in the past, Dr. Johns had talked about, possibly with you, and I was looking at past presentations, maybe finishing more of the flooring in the elementary building, or looking into roof, a partial roof replacement at the elementary building, a keyless access system, things like that. So those are things that are not specifically yet nailed down for this budget, but need to be defined.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on this slide? Okay, and then what I did for the rest of this presentation, was basically highlighted the 4 funds that are part of that previous slide. So Sean, last week you had said, we're really looking for anomalies, and really within our district here, there aren't many, because our, the bulk of our revenues are local dollars, property taxes, student fees, and maybe some building rentals. That makes up over 80% or close to that, I believe. And then the bulk of our expenditures are salaries and benefits. So really the anomalies would just be smaller things that fall outside of those 2 things. But I just wanted to give you an idea of, you know, this is where I was thinking this really looks like cheese to me, but revenues and expenditures, this is where the money's coming in and how it's going out. If you can go to the next slide, please. Here I just highlighted some of the bigger maybe takeaways that, you know, went into these different sub-line items for the budget. So for salaries, we have $40,000 for teacher lane changes. So during negotiations last year, we agreed to allowing teachers to jump more than 1 lane if they earn a master's degree. So we're rewarding them for getting a master's degree and not holding them at just moving 1 lane at a time. So that's increasing slightly. Decreased the our substitute costs this year. I'm anticipating we'll have less substitute costs because we won't have as many long quarantine periods. We added 1 full-time teacher. As we talked about a lot last year, we had a pretty hefty increase to our PPO medical insurance. That's the plan that most of our plan participants are enrolled in. Let's see. Some other bigger ones, and this isn't even that big of expenditures, but non-capitalized equipment, both under the education fund and the building and grounds funds. We weren't so lucky in being able to staff our summer help for custodians. So they're running pretty lean, and so in places where we could find a smaller piece of equipment like a floor scrubber or a brush cutter, we would like to purchase those things. Again, they're not much money, $1,500 here or there, but to just help with the limited people resources we have and not have to outsource to a contractor. So actually we'll likely save money in the long run by doing that. Next up, operations and maintenance. Again, we don't really get much money. We don't get anything from the federal government. Salary and benefits are most of our expenditures. If you can jump to the next slide. We're hoping to get that plow truck that we talked about in the last meeting. Wherever there were vendors that could tell us what their proposed increases were, like natural gas, for example, we use a energy consortium. They're estimating that the natural gas increase for this school year will be 35%. I baked that into the budget. Go to the next slide. Transportation, again, going to see probably a little less revenue than we did last year. If you can jump to the next slide. There is a salary, a decent salary increase for our bus drivers. If you recall, last winter, around January, we, increased the bus drivers' salaries to be more at market with competitors because we're having a really hard time finding bus drivers, like all school districts are doing. So this made us a little bit more competitive. And then we're anticipating a fair amount of repairs to a wheelchair bus we have. So that's where we have some increases to supplies and purchase services is for these anticipated repairs. And then next slide is just working cash, so no pie charts here, because the working cash fund, again, is more a rainy day fund, doesn't have any direct expenditures. We can move money out of it if need be, but we're anticipating a nearly a $740,000 balance by the end of June 30th, or the end of the school year.
Are we just trying to build that then? Is that the goal?
Yes, it's good to have a buffer, so that would just, again, rainy day fund, if something major popped up, then.
Then we could take care of it without, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, working cash is used by most districts as your rainy day or your savings.
Parachute,
or your, yeah. That's truly your extra fund balance.
And then these are just the remaining funds. They chunk them together, simply because they were outside of that, you know, what the state budget form is looking for in terms of a balanced budget. This is just showing what our actual revenue and expenditures were in fiscal year 22 and what the budgeted revenue and expenditures are for fiscal year 23. So with that, any questions?
Thank you for putting it together. It was really, the visuals were really nice with the pie charts.
Thank you.
That's how I think more, so appreciate that.
Oh, great, thanks. And Sean, this is just
Yep.
to answer, the question you had. So this is something that we need to consider in the near future here.
Are keyless entries considered more secure? No, just. Okay. So the benefit would be,
The benefit for us would be tracking keys for administratively.
is that, yeah, it's
Is that-
annoying, huh?
Have you done that before?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can control access on the weekends easier in
Mhm.
different times.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so you can monitor who's coming in the building and who's in the building and who's not. So
Mhm.
in that way, maybe a little bit, but as far as what we think of as safety, it's not,
Okay, yeah.
not an extra deterrent for malfeasance.
Yeah.
But it's nice for us. I mean, that's a nice to have. Administratively, it's not I wouldn't view that as a safety issue.
Safety, yeah.
How many people have keys?
A couple
I mean,
hundred.
is it most everyone, most of the staff and teachers, or?
Yeah, oh, yeah. 250 people at any given time.
Okay, so there's 250 keys out there that have access to.
Yeah.
Okay. Personally, I can see a little bit of a safety bump
Yeah.
there. Because if somebody comes in the morning and says, hey, I lost my key card.
Yeah.
Then the
Just switch it.
administrator can go in and shut it off.
Yep.
So, maybe a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. In that way, sure. It's something we can look at. It doesn't hurt to look.
Have we looked at costs or no?
No.
Any other questions on the present budget? Return to learn plan?
Carly and I talked, well, to wrap up the budget discussion, you know, we talked a little bit, we we wanna make sure that the board understands how tight this budget is. And those margins are smaller than they've been in the last 10 years, so
Is that because we're coming to the end of
Yep.
the,
we're coming to that peak, and I thought that peak actually would happen 2 or 3 years ago.
okay,
And we've been able to kind of push it off, and actually the pandemic helped with that a little
Because of
bit.
the funding.
Our expenses came down and we had additional, funding that came in that helped a little bit, just enough. It
Yeah.
kind of disrupted that, process, so, but now we're at that peak, so next year, when we start budgeting again in December for next year, we're gonna take a closer look. And it might mean that we have a deficit of for that particular year, so it would be expenses over revenues, so we would have to have a deficit reduction plan with the state. That's not uncommon for school districts. In fact, I would guess in Milburn's history, it's more common than not to run a deficit budget. For example, Warren did it for 20-some years. So it doesn't mean that your district is terrible, it just means that if you continue to do that, it's gonna be a problem. So then you have the options, and then we have discussions about, do you increase revenue, or do you decrease expenses, or both? And those are the conversations that we would have as a community, just like we did in 2012 and 13 with our community. Actually, starting in 2010, we had those. Actually, starting in 2009,
the
we had to have some
conversation
tough
started?
conversations
Yeah.
with our community to say, this is the reality. And then it took from 2009, we didn't have control over the revenues, other than to run a referendum, which was very unpopular at that time, and always is. But it took us until 2013 before the community understood that we were serious. We gained their trust and said, no, this is for real, and we need more money, and they agreed, and they gave us more money at that time, so.
So that's why we were talking about that, the importance of that session.
Right.
Yeah, which you were doing.
I'm doing. Are you doing it with me?
It bumps into the one that I was gonna do, but it might be that.
Oh, great! It's all on me.
Well, but I mean, maybe it has to, maybe you have to find a balance. I leave one early, in lieu of this conversation and seeing that, yeah, it's coming up, it might be worth.
Question.
The difference this time, from before, when we were going into this in 2010, in 2011, no, when did I start? I think it was 2011, our deficit was negative 5.6 million, and now we're at a positive 2-point-some million as far as our fund balances at the beginning of the year. So we are coming into this next recession and difficult time as in a position of strength as a district, whereas in the past we came, it was tough. It was
You mean
real
going
tough.
into 2008?
Going in, well, 2008 we were okay, but structurally there were issues even in 2008. Yeah.
That you could, yeah.
Yeah.
That domino started somewhere.
Yeah, we were passing budgets at that time with a $2 million a year deficit on a $12 million budget. That's pretty big. That'll erase any fund balances real quick. So that can continue, and that's when we had to change course quickly and drastically. So what I'm saying is that we have the opportunity to change course slowly and with care versus a hard chop like we have in the past that really disrupts programming and disrupts a lot of things.
But we shouldn't want to. I mean, you said 2009 to basically 2012. Do we have 3 years to communicate with the community in order to build the trust to say, hey, we're probably going to need to pass a referendum soon.
I've started talking about this for two years,
Okay.
3 years, but yes.
And part of-
We've been distracted by COVID through that time, and we've gotten a little bit of a boost, but this has been coming, and there's a reason why we send out the communications that we do in the spring for taxes purposes, and so we can start to teach people and explain why taxes are so high, why our, Milburn struggles with revenue.
And part of this is happening in parallel with paying off the bond in the
Right.
near future too.
But in my experience, people have to feel it and before they understand it, experience that. And so when we start to experience our class sizes creeping up into close to 30 again in 4th through 8th grade, which in some cases they're getting there this year, then people will start to say, oh, what's going on? Why are my class sizes so high? And we can explain that, or why are my taxes so high and my class sizes are so high? It should be better. Well, then we have an opportunity to teach. So and I'm not saying this is for sure. It depends on, there's so many variables going out into the future. It depends on the state funding. It depends on lots and lots of things. It depends on enrollment. Our enrollments aren't as low as what we projected because of this last housing turnover. So the last housing turnover generated more new students in our district because people whose kids have graduated out and are, quite frankly, tired of paying the taxes to live here, they're moving out, which has been a trend for a long time. And it's totally understandable, and I don't blame them. It's just a reality of what you have to do here. This is very tough. It's very expensive to live in Lindenhurst and go to school here.
Help me out here a little bit, Jason, because it was 2 years ago or so that we were saying that the light was at the end of the tunnel in 2025 because that bond was
Yeah.
gonna be completely paid off. And we were talking about a substantial tax decrease because of that. So now that doesn't look like that's gonna happen.
No, that's gonna happen. That's two separate issues. So what you saw today, that's a good question, Jim, and what we need to do is more education about that.
Okay.
It takes a long time. But what you saw today was the operational.
All right.
The bonds are completely separate. So back in 2004, those bonds were approved by the community. And that goes right from the taxpayer to the county back through our checkbook to the mortgage company. We don't have access to that for operations. What you saw today was simply operations. So the taxpayers are gonna see relief after next year. So next year's gonna be tough.
Right.
Next year's gonna be real tough. That's why I sent that letter out the last 2 years, 3 years, actually, I think going back 4 years, saying, hang on, people, it's gonna be tough. It's gonna get tougher and tougher because of that, the bond ramping up toward the end. And next year also, we're gonna get hit with a 5% increase because of the CPI, because of inflation.
Right.
Inflation was 7-8%. We're capped at 5% as a school district. So, but we can capture that 5% to keep up, because our costs are increasing too. But that's gonna feel, to a taxpayer, to us, all of us in this room, that's gonna feel pretty tough next year because it's our last year of the bond payment, which is higher than this year.
Right.
And you're gonna get hit with the 5%. Versus the average has been 2% for the last 20 years.
Yeah, I just received my statement. It looked like
Yeah.
we were over 7%.
Mine's over 7%.
So that's the valuation. Blue cards are the valuation.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean your tax bill is gonna go up 7%.
Tax bill can only go up to 5.
It can only go up,
Right.
well,
So they're
your
saying-
individual can't go more than 5. The valuation of your house, if everybody's rises the same, so it's like the sea level, if it all rises the same, the whole sea only rises 5%. But if you are on a different spot or your house goes up 8% and mine only goes up 5, you're gonna absorb more of that increase.
Yeah, I know it's crazy, but for what they think my house is worth, if somebody would write that check for me today, I would be out of there in 48 hours, because it's not worth anywhere near what they think it is, so. But I know that that's a different,
Right.
that's a different topic, but what, are we talking about having to have a referendum in order to take care of the increased costs in the next, I don't know, 2 years?
I don't know, it depends on how, there's a lot of factors that go into it, and I just think that we have to have that conversation at some point. So you have a choice, referendum is the only way, the only control that we have of increasing our revenues is through a referendum, right? So to balance a budget, money in, money out, you either increase your revenues or you decrease your expenses.
I
Those are the
predict
choices.
pitchforks and torches, and the only reason I'm predicting that is you can't bring guns onto the school grounds. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, all right.
I mean, because the people I talk to, this is, wow.
But that's why we have this opportunity, I think, with this significant decrease that people are gonna feel after next year. So we have one more year of pain, and then it's gonna go down significantly. So when you look at what we're collecting, about 13, 14 million total outside of the bonds, somewhere in that range is what we're collecting for operations, transportation, O&M, and we're gonna collect next year 5 million on top of that from the bonds. So you take that 5 million off, that's a big chunk.
Right, so are we talking referendum, pay the bonds off, or are we saying pay the bonds off and then a referendum?
We can't control, we can't touch the bonds.
Well, I understand, but what's the timing and the thought process?
So,
Okay, whenever the bonds come due, are we speaking a referendum prior to that?
no,
No.
Or after?
No,
After, it would be
After
the,
that.
it would be the year after, was it 41?
Yeah.
Ones did one, and your taxes went down,
Right,
but they didn't go down all the way.
okay,
It's kind of how they pitched it. Yes, you will get a tax cut,
right,
but it won't be as big as
okay.
previously
I get it.
promised.
So how is this different than what we were talking about 2 or 3 years ago?
It's not.
There were conversations about when the bond was finally paid off, that we were gonna go and see if we could get, more money, and my recollection is through referendum.
yeah, correct,
Okay,
So
so
I was
from
not-
that standpoint, that hasn't changed?
correct.
Okay.
The only thing that's changed possibly is the timing. So two
Okay.
or 3 years ago when
that might be where I'm getting confused here.
yeah, so when I brought that up, Jim, that's a good point. When I brought that up a few years ago,
Yeah.
I was thinking exactly what John was saying.
Okay.
When the bonds come off, you'll see you want a $3,000 home, you might see a $2,000 drop in your tax bill
Okay.
for Milburn. And instead of a $2,000 drop, Lake Villa did a $1,500 drop. So they ran another referendum underneath that was for 500, so that your taxes still go down. So it doesn't feel as bad to a taxpayer because you already have that budgeted. But I don't even think that's possible right now, because I agree with you that this is a really tough environment to run a referendum. Really
Yeah.
tough. So 3 years ago, I was saying that in case we wanted to be ready for that opportunity.
Right.
Now I think you're gonna have to let the bonds come off, you're gonna see that the taxpayers will see their tax bills go down completely. We'll
Okay.
still be okay at that point. We might have to start eating away at our fund balances.
Okay.
We might have to do some cuts. We might have to feel a little bit of pain until everybody says, yeah, this isn't what I signed up for my kids.
And then we ask for more.
Then we ask for more money.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you. That
that-
makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I don't think you can just ask for more money without seeing the
Yeah, I think.
pain.
Yeah.
But I think we also have a pretty good history of being fiscally sound the last 6 or 7 years. So hopefully that has something to say, because I know, Warren, everyone's like, well, you guys been, and you were talking, they were running fund deficits for years. We have been balanced budgets, saving them money, being conservative. So hopefully that says to the community, we're managing our money as best we can, and this is just the nature of schools, is they require you to go back to the public on a regular basis and say, this is what we need to run our school, and convince people that it's a good.
Right, I mean,
Yeah, it's not a
again,
bad thing.
it all depends on the message and how the message is sent. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I'm not telling you anything that everybody doesn't know already. But, I mean, it's gonna be the timing thing, and
Right.
this is, I don't know.
That's the challenge, that's okay.
Yeah, that's why there's a superintendent.
The good news, the good news is we're in a good fiscal position to start with. Is it gonna look, are we going to take a hit probably starting next year on our financial profile score from the state? Sure. We finally hit recognition
Yeah.
after being absolutely the lowest financial profile score in the state of Illinois. We were the lowest.
Well, then I would ask them for the $75,000, from the transportation stuff.
That'd be great.
They're not coughing up, and then tell them to pound sand if they're still
But
complaining.
that was part of the problem before, is the state wasn't paying.
Well,
Yeah.
Right.
it's not
Yeah,
their
and it
problem.
wasn't 75,000, their proration cost Milburn at 1.1 million a year. That was that's why we were in real dire financial straits, because the state was cutting and we were getting piled on by, deficit spending.
Oh, don't forget the unfunded mandates. Come on,
Yeah,
those
there's
don't help.
additional unfunded mandates, that doesn't help, but. And everybody understands expenses go up. School districts have the same expenses as everybody else. Carly and I were talking about that today. We have to pay gas for the buses. Our employment costs are going up, our insurance costs are going up. They have been going up at a rate faster than the 2%. No, the inflation rate.
Yeah, the insurance, they hurt us this year, 11%.
So, at some point, those two lines are gonna cross. That's just the way it is. But, the last referendum lasted longer than I expected, which is awesome. Typically, it's 5 to 8 years you plan before, just the way the funding is set up in Illinois, you kind of erase that gain in 5 to 8 years typically. And it's been, next year it'll be 10. We're trying to make it last as long as possible. We're not in dire straits, I don't wanna panic anybody. It's okay, it's gonna be good.
Everyone comfortable on the budget? Our return to learn plan.
Okay. Any questions about the return to learn plan? This is just an exercise for us to get our ESSER's money. That's why we must do it. So that we are limited in, what we can spend the American Rescue Plan money on. Although it's very broad, it's also very specific about what you can spend certain things on. It's kind of weird, so. We have to spend a certain amount on, closing the learning gap that, for the learning loss from COVID, which is why we're doing summer school and we're targeting those funds toward students who need some catch-up, that we've identified during the school year. For summer school, we're looking at doing some more after-school tutoring this year to help with that, if we can get that up and running and find enough employees to do that. And we are also looking at possibility of summer school again next year. And we're able to offer that for no cost to parents, which is great. We've also done air purification systems, the ventilation project that Carly talked about earlier. That's gonna come out of this money. We hired an additional 0.6 social worker at the middle school, recognizing that there's more social emotional needs of kids coming back from COVID and behaviors. We're seeing more interesting behaviors than we have in the past. For whatever reason, we just are. So,
What would be an example?
of interesting behaviors?
Yes.
Well, attention for one.
Okay.
We've seen more physical fights in the, I would say, more physical interactions, maybe,
Okay.
In what age groups?
middle school.
Have the facilities been having problems? Stuff getting destroyed?
Yes, we had a lot of vandalism last year that we have not seen in the past. If you recall the TikTok challenge of destroying a bathroom and.
Oh,
yeah, that was a treat, yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. It's all, but this is relative to Milton, so what we used to say is, what we used to see as problems are not, or it's a different level that we've seen in the last year. Kids not getting along, kids not learning how to interact with each other appropriately. It just leads to more interventions.
We're looking at that as being a result, either directly or indirectly, of the COVID
Yeah,
situation.
I think the added stress and that it put on
Isolation.
families and kids and isolation, all of that was caused a problem for some kids. Not every child, but
Yeah.
more. We're seeing more than we have in the past.
Have we thought of putting, like the social emotional, the second step program, we looked into updating that or finding something that might be more,
Yes, we constantly look at new programs. I
Yeah.
don't think we're using Second Step in the middle school anymore.
Okay.
They're using something else.
okay. So it is being updated and kind of trying to keep current with, which I know you're doing with the
Restorative
circles,
practice.
restorative practices, thank you.
Yep. Which has been very effective.
Yeah, that's cool. And you're still working on the training with that too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. One of the questions on the thought exchange was why don't we use that money for a taxpayer rebate? That was not a qualifying expenditure, but I guess you could, if we could have found enough other areas to offset, that's a possibility, but then we wouldn't have the ability to spend on other things, so.
There was one person that commented on it?
Yeah. Yep.
Any
And
questions?
that's okay, it's a good question.
You guys comfortable with this? Any other questions?
Mhm.
Alright. Do we have any residents who wanted to present concerning the budget or the return to learn?
Just a question, alright? How much was actually received in the ESER fund?
ESER three was 414. ESER one and two is gone, I believe. We've already spent that on COVID-related materials and supplies and
That's for last year?
the last two years, yes.
So 414 was just for this coming year now, starting.
That's what we have left of. We could have started spending that last year, but we spent 1 and 2 first. So 414.
So this is ESER 3?
3.
And then, so the things that they were used for, you said, summer school, after school, air purification system, and you added a social worker?
Yep.
That was from 2. Or is it from 3? That's
3.
3. Okay. What is that total for those 3 things?
I don't know.
I would have to, we can start pulling it up.
So, I guess what I mean is, there's remaining funds out of the 414K?
There, as of right now, yes.
Have you guys maybe ever considered, the sheriff's department responds here to the middle school, right? I'm not sure if they're even on board, but consider the school resource officer paying half the salary with the sheriff's department?
That's on our regular board meeting agenda tonight. That would not be qualifying for this. We could look at it, but the one thing to remember with this is it's one-time shot, so we'd have to commit to doing that moving forward.
Yeah, forever,
Yeah, right,
because once you have them, you don't wanna lose them,
right.
so it does not qualify under the ESER fund.
It might qualify, but again, if you do that for 1 year, then,
When the ESER fund's no longer around.
which is, I think, at this point, we have until next year to spend it, so we could do it through FY '24.
At least get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Find a way to come up with additional funds to continue.
Yep.
I think that would be very important. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Good.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Okay.
Sorry, follow up on that.
Sure.
Any safety precautions, do those apply for the ESER fund? Like 3M on the windows, additional active shooter killer training for staff? Does that apply? Can you use that for the ESER fund? Given that you're seeing an uptick in, I guess, the way you describe the behavior.
Yeah.
That's more aggressive, I guess, or
Yep.
difficult interactions with the kids.
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of a concern as a parent,
Yep. Me too.
so,
Thus the social worker.
yeah, that's a huge resource. I
Yep.
think, even a buffer in between there with that school resource officer, which you said you're gonna address later, which is good.
Yep.
For the teachers and the staff, I mean, sometimes getting into an environment with a social worker isn't always gonna work. So worst case scenario, as you know from my profession, that's how we always think and operate and train.
Yep.
And live in it. Making sure that the staff is prepared for, I guess, the elephant in the room, that active killer, active shooter situation. It's an uncomfortable topic in buildings like this, but, I think it's super valuable and important for them to just be prepared.
Absolutely.
It's an awful thing to think about, but, you know, we do fire drills, we do lockdown drills, tornado drills. You know, there's something, I don't know if the ESER fund will qualify for that, but it's gotta be huge.
Yeah, I don't know that it does or would. But we could look.
To be outside of the nature of the ESER.
Yeah, you'd have
Right,
to.
it seems to be more dedicated to restorative, measures for the impacts of COVID.
But we've had other safety grants in the past that we've used for everything that you've mentioned, we've
Yeah, I mean, I guess
actually
you
done.
you could look at it from a perspective, but if you're seeing an uptick in aggression and violence, I mean, that type of training could apply to COVID relief, in my opinion, because the staff needs to be ready for worst case scenario, if you're seeing that aggression, whether it's at home or in here or wherever, it could all apply to, like you said, social workers working on that aggression with them for COVID. It's really no different, it's just, safety instead of, working through those social worker progressions to make the kids better understand, so. There's a loophole, I'm sure.
I was gonna say, we wouldn't have to dig too deep to find, COVID funds at the federal and state level that have been used for things that are questionable when it comes to COVID, and that's especially at the federal level. During this kind of meeting, is it okay to have a dialogue with,
Technically, he's not supposed to be, he's supposed to just give us a presentation, but we're pretty loose generally. You got anything else you wanna share?
No, that's all, thank you, I appreciate the time.
Thank you. All right, then I'll make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Does anybody need to take a break? Okay. Then we'll call to order this regular, board meeting of Millburn School District 24. If you can have a roll call, please.
Who motioned?
I made a motion and
I second.
he seconded.
Brendan Peter. Alright, sorry.
That's all.
Ms. Thomas.
Yes, present.
Mr. Cole.
Present.
Mr. Guzio.
I'm here.
Mr. Lorenzen.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Mr. Pederini.
Present.
Ms. Roberts.
Here.
Not present but accounted for.
Please stand for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm gonna assume we didn't have anyone step in, wants to make a comment. All right. Does anyone have any additions, non-action items? No. Let's get going on the action items. Approval of the final reading of the board policies. Does anyone have any one of these policies we want to pull out and discuss?
I think 7270,
Okay.
definitely, we did discuss that the last meeting, where it talked about, the requirements that the school shall administer these drugs, and it also talks about stocking the medicines as well. However, after I did a review of the statutes, it said, really the controlling terms were may authorize, the district may authorize people to administer, nurse or trained personnel. I didn't see any, looking at the first list of statutes that were identified, saying that we must stock at all, and that we must administer. I think it's important that the verbiage is changed to be consistent with the statute, because you get yourself into trouble. We know that there are controlled medicines that there's limited availability. Certainly we make efforts to do so where possible, but I don't think you hamstring yourself through your own policy. So I think we should pull that
out
until that's replaced.
Okay.
Pull the shell out.
And Vanessa, yeah, pull that particular policy out. And Vanessa, did you want to address 47?
Yeah, just, if everyone, I don't know if had a chance to look at the rewording, just making the goal just more flexible, but in being more flexible, actually workable, and just saying that, working towards actual ways that we can save, instead of setting goals that may not fit our district's needs. Same thing. Why hamstring ourselves by saying we're gonna reach these certain goals, those goals have nothing to do with what we actually need to do. Maybe there are some different areas that we're creative about and wanna fix and address, so.
This was the like reduced by 50%, that was
Yeah,
this
Yeah.
one.
and the policy
Yeah.
said to meet that
Yeah.
by, I believe, July of 2020.
We do like a time travel, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously this is much more flexible, which again, there's flexibility in it with statements of practical feasibility, right? But it also allows you to do more if in fact you choose to do so.
Mhm.
But as, you know, Jason, you stated, pretty aggressive on certainly the paper, the recycling of the paper and landscape as well, so,
Yeah, for those mentioned, we're 100%.
yeah.
Mhm.
I don't think we put anything to it. Unless, I mean, people throw things in the wrong garbage. but
Yeah.
But
The opportunity is there.
There you go.
So if we have this, I'm definitely in favor of adopting this as amended.
So we could just say that as.
Yep.
Okay, and,
You could say as presented, take out, 270 and whatever, number 470 as amended.
okay. So, I would like to have a motion to approve the listed policies with 470 as amended and 270 as amended. Removed. Okay.
so moved.
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the motion has passed. Can I have a motion to approve the 2022-2023 school year return to learn plan?
I'll make a motion to approve, oh, unless we have questions? I think we are all good on it, to approve the 2022-2023 school year return to learn plan.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Approve the public display of the tentative budget. So this is just displaying that, not making changes to it.
I move to approve the public display of the tentative budget for fiscal year 2023.
I'll second.
You will need a roll call when you're ready.
Oh, me.
Don't we need a roll call?
Oh, that's me. Yeah, sorry. Miss Boss.
Yes.
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. Guziak,
Yes.
Mr. Lorenzen,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Pederini,
Yes.
Ms. Roberts.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion carries, excellent. Report on the shared services outsourcing.
Scrap. What?
That's not it.
Yeah, this is not the shared services, but that's a very lovely, update.
Would you like me to email it to you or just talk to it?
You wanna talk to it?
Okay.
See if that link was just, there it is.
That's the site-based expenditure report, that's something different.
That's different
Yeah.
again. Wow,
Oh,
maybe I'm
two.
gonna keep going on this, find it someday. Nope,
No, so essentially the shared services, report is simply a list of, entities we team up with and share services. So for example, we're sharing, a speech therapist with an Antioch school district and an OT with a Gurney school district. So essentially, that's what the report lists.
Okay, and we did review that.
Yep.
We reviewed it, yep.
Okay. Would you like
Is
me to
it, the
email
link
to you?
doesn't work?
No.
does anybody have any questions about that or need to see it?
If the link works, I'd just like to see it real quick.
Oh,
You want-
email it? Sure. email I just sent, it's the first document, it's a PDF. So basically it lists, if these were, services that we used in the previous fiscal year, and if we're using it in the current fiscal year, what the function is or the reasoning is, and essentially the vendor, the entity that we're sharing services with.
Oh, I see. So we're sharing services on Johnson Controls and Grove Mechanics? Like
Meaning
with
that, like, we, in conjunction, we work on these maintenance services within the building.
Okay,
So they will work with us to do HVAC, work.
okay. So like we contract them?
Service, we don't have a service
No, we
contract,
don't, not with,
Okay,
we pay them.
as
They
needed?
come in
Okay.
and provide services.
Okay.
Okay.
So what is the advantage of having that shared service? For
What-
HVAC?
No advantage.
Okay.
don't know
well,
why
I
that's
mean, for HVAC, did you say?
Yeah.
I mean, this is just a report that we're required to complete, and so we use, say, Grub Mechanical for HVAC because there are some things that we need them to do for us, just to
As opposed to having our staff.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So if it's a very complex HVAC repair,
Oh, sure.
our custodians would not, I guess, be equipped to do it, so we would call this vendor in to assist.
Okay.
However, lighter things, changing out filters, our custodians will do.
Okay. Perhaps I had the wrong definition of shared services. I was thinking about if we had a 0.5 resource for a counselor and a 0.5 resource at this school and then at some other school. That's not what we're speaking about.
Well,
Some of those are like that.
right.
So what am I missing?
There is an example of that in there. This is just an entire list of all those services basically that we employ, right?
That we may need to contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes more sense that way. Okay.
I just didn't
Oh,
want
it's
to.
shared services or outsourcing is the term.
Oh, okay.
Does that make more
Yeah.
sense?
Shared services.
If I could see it, that'd be great.
We were talking about glasses earlier.
Yeah, I gotta talk to someone and see if I can sit closer.
Anytime you want, man.
You gotta know the right people.
That's right.
Great spot.
Alrighty, I get it, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any questions on any of these? Can I have a motion to approve the report on shared services or outsourcing?
So moved.
I'll second.
Roll call,
Mr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. Guziak,
Yes?
Mr. Lorenzen,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
yes.
Mr. Pederini,
Yes.
Ms. Roberts,
Yes.
Ms. Boss.
Yes.
Motion
passed.
carries.
All right, does anybody have anything they want to pull out of the consent agenda? If not, we can have a motion to approve that.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as listed on the meeting minutes.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Mr. Guziak,
Yes?
Mr. Lorenzen,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Pederini,
Yes.
Ms. Roberts,
Yes.
Ms. Boss?
Yes.
Mr. Coleman?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Moving on to information and discussion. So I think the school resources will be a long time, so let's do the district and the superintendent first, and then we'll have a nice long discussion on it. Or hopefully short discussion, I don't know. What do we have on the district goals on there?
So our district goals, what we're looking at as a staff for this year, in following our strategic plan that was developed and approved by the board and reconfirmed last fall, is going to be under two basic categories. One is building connections, so really about building relationship, and the other side is about academic growth. Because those academic growth is why we exist. You know, schools were put into place for academic learning. So that academic growth piece, I know our community feels very strongly about that, and I know the board feels very strongly about growing kids academically, and I also know that parents and our board feels very strongly about not only growing kids academically, but growing them as people and building connections across the community. So we feel that that's very important. We feel that as a community and the strength as a community to build connections both within our staff, within our teams, and between parents and staff members and kids and teachers. All of that is important because we understand how learning works. Kids aren't ready to learn until they connect with their teacher. We're not ready to learn from each other until we can connect with people too and have a strong relationship. Whether or not we agree with each other or not, but if we understand each other and can build those skills and connect, it tends to go a lot better. So that's where our head is at as an administrative team, and as what I gleaned from what so far I've heard from the board and our strategic planning and discussions we've had with staff and feedback from staff and the community. So that's where we're at, and all of our strategies for reaching those goals will be under those. Specifically, we have a very specific goal, so under that we created a SMART goal for academic growth. Specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-bound. That's our SMART goal. We are going to improve on the conditional growth index, which we talked a little bit about when I shared the NWA scores in June, I believe it was June. Talked about that conditional growth index where we want to see all kids grow. And as a district, we can look at that growth index. If all kids are growing at the rate they should be, we're doing okay. And we want to actually do better than what they should be or expected growth, because we're right at expected growth with our kids at this point. And we would like to be better because we're not satisfied with that. So we'd like to move up 3 points on our conditional growth index, and eventually each year, and then eventually get up to the 60th plus 67th-ish percentile for growth.
Which is where we've been in the past.
Not on growth, no.
So this is
On
kind of a new-
achievement, yes.
Okay.
So there's two different aspects of when we can look at scores. One is achievement, so this is the bar, and you try to get as many kids above that bar as possible. Well, what I talked a little bit about in June was there's this band of kids right around the bar, a little bit above, a little bit below. If we just want to get more kids above the bar, you can focus, all of our energy should be focused right on these kids. Well, what about the kids who are struggling below here that may never have the ability to get up here? And that's okay, that's just not their giftedness, because we're only talking about a narrow academic score, keep in mind. Or the kids that are already way above the bar, are we gonna focus on them? So we want to focus on growth for all children. If all children go, of course that number is gonna go up too, but we really wanna be able to put programs in place to support every kid. And that's what PLCs are about. That's a tool, a map, so to speak, professional learning communities. It's a formal model of how we can have those discussions as staff members and move that forward. So that's where we're headed and why we've been going down this road and what we expect this year. So we're expecting 3 points growth-ish in reading and math on the math test, on the conditional growth index. Very specific. So all of our strategies will go reading and math below that. We'll do other things too. We're gonna teach social studies and science, but those are the areas that we're focusing on for growth as an indicator.
Do we have numbers or percentages of the kids that are, you would consider the lowest category, percentage-wise for the schools?
Yes, I have that. I can't bring that up on the top of my head. So we look at different, when I look at scores, I look at different segments of student achievement. I look at students who might be below the 34th percentile on NWEA.
All right.
So just as a cutoff line, there's no magic number about that other than 34th percentile is a half a standard deviation from the norm.
Got it, okay.
So it's significant.
Sure.
It's low average. And below would be below average. So we're looking at those kids and performance and boosting their skills and abilities on that. There are students that may never get out of that, and we want to look at boosting them as well. We want to increase their academic achievement as much as possible, but we also are talking about the whole child, giving them skills that are going to be useful in life too. But for the purposes of this particular goal, this is what we are focused on. But even, we're still focusing on, if someone is in the scoring achievement-wise in the 9th percentile, we still want that student to increase their academic skill set. So this will measure their growth as well as everybody else. Puts every kid in play. In the past, we were focusing on the middle, moving that up. Now we're focusing on every student, moving, just making sure they grow. And I'm hoping that this focus and this attention will get us. I think we've always been pretty good as a district, but we can get even better on that. Does that make sense? Any sense?
Done.
Okay.
Superintendent evaluation? Is that something you guys-
Superintendent evaluation, I did not put that on there, so don't know if that's a discussion.
Is that something you guys want?
Thank you for complaining.
I don't know, yeah, I think we were all just completed it, right?
We completed it.
And now the tool, we're paying the invoice
what's-
out for the tool, so we'll get set up
Okay,
with
for our training.
training.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that was answered? or-
Yes, ask and answer, so, yeah.
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, let's hear about
And a simple question, there wasn't like a master service agreement that was submitted as we had for thought exchange, which is what was throwing me off. But we saw those services, well, we saw basically what would be invoiced for, and I asked a very specific question. Would this permit us to perform 2 evaluations of Dr. Linden this year and allow Dr. Linden to perform the evaluations of all his administrative staff for that particular amount? The answer was yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, long time coming on that
Well,
one.
yeah,
Man, I was like,
we
are we ever gonna get
we
the
have it
answer?
in writing, that's what you have to do, right?
Did these people understand why there was confusion and question?
Well, there wasn't a master service agreement, which is what I'm used to seeing.
Well, yeah, but.
So I would hope that next year they have that, but for now, I know we were time bound, we received the answer to the question, which allows us to do that, so.
He changed the first time we had a question, he changed the wording to make it more clear, he
Mhm.
understood that.
Yeah.
He's learning.
We'll whip them.
They'll have to try again.
All right, what do you have for us on school resource officers?
Well, I sent a lot of information your way on school resource officers. I happened to attend a quarterly meeting of school safety with the Regional Office of Education, Lake County Superintendents, police officers. We are now having a quarterly meeting with that group on school safety, which is great. At that meeting, the first hour of the meeting was Ken Trump, not related to Donald Trump. Kenneth Trump is a nationally recognized school safety guru. He's got a degree in this. He's been studying it for many years. He's called out to sites to support school districts after. He does audits beforehand. He's kind of a, as Ben would say, he's kind of a big deal. Ben would say that about himself, but he's kind of a big deal in the area of school resource. So we had a presentation from him going over what to look for, what's most important, because there's a lot of things that we can spend our money on to have the idea or the feeling of school safety. Not all of those things actually make a school safer. So he said, be careful about who is selling you something, why they're selling you something, and make sure that it's actually something that's going to increase safety. I also pointed out, when we're talking about school safety, there's a large continuum of school safety going from everyday discipline, that's a school issue, all the way up to and including an act of terrorism, planned terrorism in a school. That would be the most severe act of violence when we're talking about school violence. So we had that discussion about where do you want to spend your money on some of the most likely things that are going to happen on the lower end of the continuum that could lead up the continuum. Not to say that they will or they won't, because there's no clear patterns sometimes about who will enact violence, but be careful and be conscious of how you are spending your resources and your money. Things like keyless entry, for example. Things like they don't, maybe they increase safety a little bit, but if you're going to spend $50,000 or $60,000 on that, is it worth it, or would you rather spend it on a school social worker that year that could actually work with kids and increase their mental capacity or build relationships with kids? Or another one that he talked a lot about is there's a lot of products out there that we have looked at in the past, door locks for classrooms, barriers. How do you can spend a fortune just on these different gizmos and gadgets for locking up a door and barricading your classroom door, which may in certain circumstances help, may not. There's no evidence that is effective at all, and in fact it can't, if you can get them approved by the fire department, because the fire department doesn't like barricaded doors, that's not good for fires, then there's other issues. So these are just examples, and I don't want to poo-poo anything or any ideas that come forth, because we want to discuss them all, but it was good. He endorses school resource officers. He's not opposed to school resource officers, but as you saw in the articles, they can do a lot of good, but there has to be some thought going into it in order for them to be effective. If we're looking at a school resource officer to prevent a school shooting, there's absolutely zero research out there that says or how do you say that? Not prevent, because they can help prevent school shootings, but if a school shooting is in play for a school resource officer to stop a school shooter, the research out there is pretty weak. The conditions have to be perfect in order for that to happen, and they have to, as we saw in Uvalde, react appropriately, even when the conditions are there, and when they have opportunity, and in Parkland, and in Columbine, so what I don't want is a false sense of, if we have a school resource officer on campus, that everything's great. We still have to do our job, and the best way to do our job, keeping our community safe, is building relationships. So that goes back to building connections, knowing your kids, knowing who's struggling, knowing your families, looking for patterns. He said this over and over, look for patterns and things that are out of place. People that don't belong in certain spots where they should be, people that are acting different than they should be. Pay attention to what's going on around you. One example he used a lot of examples, but one was he had us all raise our hand and said, tell me if you know where your closest fire extinguisher is to your office.
Did you know?
I did, but I was in the minority. We don't pay attention until something's happening. So pay attention to those things. Know your plan. Practice your plan. I appreciate what Matt said earlier. Is practice your plan. Do the training. Pay attention to it. Do it during lunches so kids know where to go. Do it during recess. Do it, and you don't have to fully do it full scale. You could just stop and say, okay, kids, if we had to evacuate this room, where would you go? And we don't, for younger students, we don't make it scary. We don't want to traumatize them for no reason. But talk through that and make sure the staff knows what to do. Those are the best ways that we can do that don't cost any money, that actually prevent these awful occurrences from happening. Once the event starts, there's some things, again, if there's a school resource officer there, and there are school resource officers that have been successful in stopping or slowing down when they come in, but they have to be in the right spot at the right time.
Are we talking about getting one for each school, or like where are we at? I'm just curious to where people
I think
are at.
this was just like a exploratory,
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
discussion.
Yeah, that's a responsibility on us, that we should, and Jason's initiated this, and I think it's the
Yeah.
right thing. So, in addition to all the operational things we're talking about, I think we have a responsibility to take a look at the options that are provided and the resources that Jason.
With all due respect to Mr. Trump, again, and you've probably heard me say this before over the last few years, one of the best deterrents against a maniac with a firearm is somebody else with a firearm. Now, whether or not that resource officer would be in the perfect place at the perfect time, if some crazy, I'm just gonna be talking about crazy people,
These are crazy people.
if they know that there is an armed person in the school, sometimes that's a deterrent.
Is it? Do we know that's a deterrent?
Yeah.
The research on
Depending on how crazy they are.
I mean, is this a feeling you feel like it is, or we
Sure.
know that it is, or?
Yeah.
So which one is it?
Okay, ask your question again.
I'm just saying, like, when you say that it's a deterrent, I was just wondering if that's a gut feeling that you feel like it would be a deterrent, or I didn't see anything in
Okay,
the,
well, I'm sane, so it would certainly be a deterrent for me.
well, you're not a crazy
Well, we
Well,
don't
yeah.
know that.
Again, I wasn't elected, I was appointed, so, judges?
Does that make you?
I think by the nature of that, you can't find much data on that, you know? Like, is there going to be data where, hey, here's this crazy guy with a gun? Oh, I know someone has, like, there's no spreadsheets for that.
Well,
However, it does seem that all of these school shootings certainly happen at places that
I have
have
them.
no gun signs, no guns allowed here, no guns there. no officers, although that one in Uvalde had officers.
They had,
They had,
Some of them have them, yeah.
and didn't
But I think
Columbine
it's hard to
do them?
pinpoint
Oh.
some of that
I
stuff,
was on lunch break.
yeah.
but,
But the deterrent was there, I mean, they knew that it was, that they had one there.
Before they had the no gun signs.
my concern with the student resource officer, based on what's happened at Uvalde and what happened in Marjorie Stoneman, is legally, they have no requirement to save the kids. Like, they are not legally obligated to go and save the kids. They can literally sit there, and we saw this in Florida. He can sit there, stay in the car, stay behind his car in the parking lot while the kids get shot up, and no consequence.
It's a personal failure.
Well,
In both in
but it's a
Florida
legal failure.
and
It's a legal failure
I
because
agree.
legally, he doesn't have to do anything. If we're gonna put people here with guns, I expect them to protect the kids. I have
that is not an
no,
unreasonable
I have
expectation.
no interest in paying for someone to sit on his butt and eat a donut while my kid gets shot up.
I agree with you.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my expectation, is that if we have someone here, a school resource officer, who is armed and trained, they're gonna make the place safer, and they're gonna make my child and all children safer.
So what's our goal for a school resource officer then? As a bodyguard, as a guard of the school, or like how would we be resourcing?
Well, I think that's what
Yeah.
Jason brought up, like,
Yeah.
there seems to be this, cause there is no guarantee. Somebody really wants to get in, they're gonna get in, we've seen it
Well,
time
if
and
we-
again.
That's what I'm saying, if we have one, then we have to decide which school is gonna get protected at what time.
I don't think we're
We
there
know we
yet.
have different-
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's,
we have
I think we're
different
just
police forces.
talking.
So that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying though, so that's what I'm trying, the point I'm trying to make
yeah,
is if we can all agree that a school resource officer isn't really a bodyguard for the school. One, because we probably couldn't afford to, so we'd have to pick which school got guarded. And two, because we see they don't always step in, and also they're not the likelihood of them being in the right place at the right time to be effective isn't 100%. How are we gonna use a school resource officer? Like, what resources are we going to?
Well, there's a
Glean.
few things, that you can do. First off, you make sure that your officers that are here aren't political appointees. They're actually sworn officers that give a damn.
mhm.
And I think what we're gonna find is that there was, probably some political appointments or political favors that were done in some of these schools, because, let's face it, everybody looks at this as being a nice, easy, cushy job.
Cush gig,
And the
yeah.
fact of the matter is that it isn't. So if you're gonna pick your officers, you pick stand-up people to do it. Then on the other hand, what the articles brought out was that, well, the resource officers were getting involved in things that, perhaps they, were outside of, the bounds of what they were originally hired for. So, I mean, if your intent is to have somebody in the schools, and in order to, help defend against a worst-case scenario, then you keep them at that. And, maybe toss in officer-friendly duty or something, or something along those lines. But, some of these things that I've been reading that the resource officers get involved in, sometimes they really just don't have business doing that kind of things. It should be outside of their scope of responsibility.
So what do we envision the scope of responsibility being? Like, if we had our school resource officer, we're like hiring them because we see an asset, right? It's important fund, it could go to a social worker, it could go to a teacher, it could go to curriculum, but we're saying no, I'm not saying we wouldn't, but we're saying this money is worth putting into a resource officer because we're gonna get what?
My expectation is if somebody comes in and shoots,
So they're not
wherever
a
that,
bodyguard for the school then?
wherever that resource officer is in the school, if he's on the other side of the school,
He comes
he's
running.
gonna get there faster than the cops in Lindenhurst will get
Okay,
here.
okay,
Like, that's how I view it. So it's not
security.
like they're never gonna be at the right place at the right door. Oh, he's coming in this window, here I am. But to have somebody in the school who's armed, who can get there and be that immediate responder, that's how I view it.
Okay.
The other stuff, I see the other stuff, like we employ more than one, I think, And they do a lot of additional things. They do some training things for us. They're
The fourth and fifth grade, right? Just fifth grade?
what's that?
The curriculum they do for us?
No, I'm saying like they'll, like where I teach at,
Oh.
like they'll host like trainings and they'll run us through that stuff, like different, this is what you gotta do during these drills. I haven't thought much about that. My main priority here is that all these kids are safe. And it's the doomsday scenario, but guess what? It happens more than we think, right? We see it in the news all the time. Oh, we never thought it'd happen here. Well, I don't wanna be that school, I really don't.
I think we're not gonna solve it tonight.
Oh, no, it's just discussion, yeah.
Questions,
Yeah.
certainly was good for opening the door, I think we should add it for a future agenda item.
Yeah.
And another meeting, and I think we should have a named objective in that discussion. One, maybe just get a straw poll of who would like to pursue that option, and what their expectations would be, who would be opposed to pursuing that option, and why they're opposed to it. I think that should be a future agenda item, because there's so
Yeah.
much to discuss.
Well, how much, do we know roughly how much it would cost?
107,000,
107.
one school. But I think, you know, another consideration there is you have Millburn Elementary serviced by Lindenhurst Police, you've got Lake County Sheriffs that would respond here. You know, you look at the timing
We have
to
a-
respond to a call,
Right.
right?
We have an agreement with Lindenhurst to respond here too, right?
Lindenhurst will respond here.
They will also
Yep,
respond here,
absolutely.
okay.
Yep.
So not the Lake County,
No,
They
Lake
both
County
will.
will,
will also,
but Lindenhurst will respond
okay,
here first.
okay. But we didn't get an estimate from Lindenhurst on it,
No.
okay.
No.
Can we
That's
get a
where I was.
security review of, say, how fast they would think it would
Yeah,
take to
response
respond,
You gotta get somebody from the,
to
Yeah.
get someone from Lindenhurst?
yeah.
Yeah, it's average 2.5 minutes, but it depends on where they are,
Right, but I mean, to get someone here,
2.5 minutes.
it's 2.5 minutes, and what about, you know, a full geared up
Right.
assault team? to
Right, that's
come in?
longer,
Yeah, that's-
yeah, I would think.
That
They're
would be
just gonna
Lake
send a
County.
That
normal
would be Lake County.
plainclothes
Yeah.
guys.
I would think, yeah.
Yeah,
But I like the idea that that's about defining the role, and I think that's something we should think about.
Yeah.
Like for each of us, like, alright, what does this really mean? Is it just the dude who's sitting around waiting, or are they doing other stuff too? To make the $100,000 worthwhile?
And I think it's important, we're talking about the budget, I mean, we're talking $214,000. How, do we wanna spend that much money on this, or imagine if we were gonna spend that much money on, making kids feel welcome and belonging here, because a lot of these school shooters had something to do with the school, and they didn't really feel they were treated right. So, I'm thinking, if we stop it before it even becomes a problem,
And there were many things
yeah.
that went into it, right? I mean,
So if you have that strong, like what Ms. Rollins does, strong, program for making people feel a part, if they feel that they're, having troubles or getting bullied or whatever, they have a place or a confidential person they can talk to, you know, all of those things are preventative measures.
Right.
For this whole thing. So instead of a bodyguard at the end, that's a couple $100,000 for mainly being an armed bodyguard, maybe a couple of other things on the other side. I certainly hope we don't need a police officer to help with, behavior problems.
Lunch too.
That's what I was talking about.
Um,
That would
And if he's a
really-
lunch duty guy, I mean, never mind. So if we consider it that way, what about if we spend that money in other areas of stopping it before we get to the critical point?
I mean, we
I
can
think
do
so,
that,
yeah,
but.
I can give you an answer to
I mean-
that. The crazies are getting crazier.
Well-
That's the problem.
I wouldn't go that far, but I mean, we could put the social counselors to it, but we had an incident last school year that, you know, hey, he's gone this year, but maybe he'll come back, cause we see,
Yeah.
both in Florida and in Texas,
Yeah.
we saw them wait a year or two and come back and take out the school, you know, I mean,
You mean returning?
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
what we
Well,
also
former
consistently see
students.
is
Yeah.
that family life is terrible.
Yeah.
For these students, right? So,
I think
whereas you
it's,
can do some
it's a,
things at the school.
it's huge. And you
it's
can even do
enormous.
all of these things and it still happens.
So, yeah, I mean.
You know, I mean, there's no like Band-Aid or fix permanently for it, other, I mean, it's, you have to have this holistic approach.
Is
A
that-
kid walked into Wakanda a few days ago, loaded gun, brought it to school.
Is everyone aligned
What he
with,
just did.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
That's
I heard
messed
about
up,
that.
man.
is everyone aligned with having this on a future agenda item?
Oh, yeah,
At least
yeah,
coming with a
Yeah.
position,
sure.
again, just a straw poll.
Yeah.
Coming with a position stating pro or con.
Or
you know,
I
why
wouldn't
they
even, I
support it.
wouldn't even say I could say pro or con yet. Because I
Well,
don't-
I'm
I
just
don't
saying,
think I
if you
understand
state
what
if you state your
Yeah.
position, you should have some rationale.
No,
That's
what
what
I'm saying is, that I don't know if I even have an opinion, because I'm not sure I quite understand what, I'd like to hear
That's
more
why
people's thoughts.
this,
Yeah.
that's why we have time for an
Yeah.
upcoming agenda.
The article, I like the articles, I thought those helped
Yeah.
quite a bit.
It raised enough questions
Yeah.
at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's critical to know the average response time. I think that's a consideration.
But that's variable too.
Is that the same for the middle school?
Yeah.
Okay,
Cause they're, I mean,
yeah,
Yeah, and the
We're
other
so
thing
close.
too is, we're talking about two, maybe you have one, and make it unpredictable which building they're at. It's certainly less than 2.5 minutes from one building to another, so
Mhm.
there's just so much that tonight.
when 911 calls go out from schools, the response is, it goes out countywide
Yeah.
through their system.
Yeah.
It's,
good.
everybody comes, and they come hot.
Alright, we'll keep that
I
on the
think it was,
future.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
I'll try to wrap this up. Jason, do you recall, was it the ISBE that had they were gonna take some kind of a vote about, school districts being able to
Yeah.
arm their teachers?
Yeah, I was at that, yeah,
Okay,
that was at the last
did that
conference.
ever pass?
No,
It was at a conference prior to that.
Yeah.
2 years
And I
prior
think
It
to
was
that.
down-
before
downstate.
that too.
it was way downstate.
And I'll say, it wasn't clear, I actually spoke to someone from that school district.
Did it?
I did, and
Yeah.
I sought them out when I saw the tag,
Yeah.
the location. Cause there's always a reason, right?
Yeah.
And the vote at that time was really about allowing schools the right to self-determination.
Yes,
Not to have them or not, but allowing the schools.
I don't think a lot of
To make
people
that
understood that,
decision.
right?
But I think a lot of people didn't care
Yeah.
that that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
There was an
There were a lot
emotional
of people that
response,
didn't
a
want to
strong
understand
response.
what that
Right,
is.
right,
So-
but they were talking response times of up to 35 minutes.
yeah, that's ridiculous.
That could be a key
That's a hard-
consideration.
And you're in the middle of farm country, everybody grew up with guns out there,
Yeah,
they know how to use them.
yeah.
you
So
know.
that was why, and
I think you get a lot of people
they're
who think like,
perceived as extreme, but I don't
Yeah,
think that's extreme
yeah.
to be asking that
oh,
question.
we're gonna
So,
arm
response
every
time's 35.
teacher, and
Well,
that's not really
So
how it's
anyway,
gonna work.
I don't know how the board
Yeah.
voted the last time, because again, I wasn't here, but I would strongly recommend that, consider a yay vote and see where that goes. Cause, I'll tell you, without giving up too much information, there's teachers down south, they're armed.
Yeah, probably,
Yeah.
yeah,
Not even probably, they are, because they know the situation. So all they're asking for is, hey, just, let the districts do it themselves. And that doesn't mean that we're on the hook for doing it,
right,
but these downstate folks,
Sucks.
Oh,
It
they
does.
had adjusted
They
their,
always come by.
Right.
they had adjusted their proposal to say people with more than a 10-minute
Yeah.
response time, it would have passed.
Yeah.
But they wanted to put it on the whole, and there is certainly a big difference between a 30-minute and a 2.5-minute response time.
yeah,
You know,
so
So-
so if you have a 2.5 minute response time, the district wouldn't have voted it.
yes,
right,
but
right, right.
if they
Right, so what
had,
difference does it make?
if they had adjusted their proposal to say, hey, we're down here in southern Illinois, we're different than you up north, we need this, we wanna vote it, cause there are a lot of proposals that say just for our district, or just for these districts, you know, but.
But I think that approach was taken, and sorry, we don't wanna get too sidetracked, I believe that approach was taken, rejected, and so they had to then propose that schools have the right to self-determination, school districts. And that's all it was, it wasn't, yes, guns are allowed with trained personnel or not, it was, can districts be allowed the right to self-determination?
Well, we are way past our discussion. Not that time, we're off our filter. Does anybody else, we're gonna put this on future agenda items, please research if you're one or the other, or if you just like the research. Other future agenda items are more policies, more updates on our district goals, staffing. So when are we gonna start talking about the next and we need to get into
I
detail
think we
on
need
that?
the software first, right?
Okay, so let's stay on that for a while.
Yeah.
Training at some
Yeah.
point,
Okay.
connected to a board meeting night. I'm
Yeah.
assuming everybody will wanna maybe
Roll
come
into-
at 6:30 and
Yeah.
jump in.
When is it, the next meeting?
I don't know,
Oh, okay.
No,
a future.
a future agenda.
Maybe we could work dinner into that deal.
There you
Right.
go.
Donuts.
Get Veronica on the case. She always does good.
Are you bringing donuts?
Donuts. Donuts.
Superintendent's report.
School starts in 2 days.
Yeah, buddy.
We're excited. It's fun. It's much more fun this year than it has been for a while, so it'll be good to have the kids back and more normalcy and interactions and parents seeing that supply drop off, which is mass chaos, and hopefully people aren't too crusty about the parking situation here. It's always a challenge.
It's a rite of passage. You gotta
It's-
do it. Part of the
Try
deal.
to keep everybody safe, so. But yeah, we're rocking and rolling, and a lot of talk about school safety, a lot of talk about mission, vision, values, and goals, and we're rolling, so it's great. I will give a shout out to the Lindenhurst Police Department, because we're talking a lot about school safety and school resource officers and the Lake County Sheriff's Department. They work with us regularly and very well. Officer Foy, specifically from the Lake County Sheriff's Department, is great to work with. We have his phone number. He said call anytime. He's the school liaison for the entire county. He's got 53, I believe, schools that he's responsible for, and they have school resource officers around the county too.
Maybe we should bring him in for
He
a
is-
future meeting.
He has been. Oh, for a board meeting? Yeah, he'll come to a board meeting. But he's on our committee, on our safety committee that meets every summer and reviews these plans, and if he can, he usually comes when we do our drills to observe and make sure we're doing it right, or somebody comes, because
And
law
he
enforcement has to be here, so.
Make suggestions on improvements and all that.
Yep. And usually it comes with one or two others, so. And so does Lindenhurst. Lindenhurst does a great job of being present, and I'm sure you'll see them on the first day of school. They're not just there to write tickets, they're also there to help keep your kids safe. So they do a great job and have a good working relationship with us, which is very nice, very nice. What else? We have, CEDAW board meeting on Wednesday night. I don't know if you can make it, but it's.
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yeah, awesome. Wednesday night is our CEDAW board meeting, the governing board meeting, and boy, there's just lots of things happening right now. But we'll be with our teachers the next 2 days, and parapros and bus drivers, and everybody back together and excited about a new school year. It's always fun. So we will see you at one building or another tomorrow night, except for you high school peoples.
Maybe. Huh?
That's it.
Carly, do you have anything else for us?
I do, not too much here, but before we jump into this, our audit is the week of September 19th. Our auditor is asking if one of you would like to or could meet with them for 15 minutes the week before, so the week of September 12th. 15 minutes, it could be a phone or a Zoom call. We just want to talk about some general auditing questions from your perspective. So I'm looking for one volunteer.
I can do that, no problem. Unless somebody else wants to.
I think it would be best to.
I would be
Yeah.
fine to serve in that too. So either way.
Rock, paper, scissors.
We could do a three-way Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, you can have two.
Okay.
We've got two.
I will, if okay, provide the auditor with your email addresses, and then she will reach out and set up a
Okay.
time. Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Okay. And then a lot of this report we've talked about with the budget, but I just wanted to put in some pictures, and I am not a good photographer. It's a horrible picture. That's a new roof on the right. You cannot see it. It was already
It's great.
Just like an old man.
That's everything.
It kinda looks like
There's a
cheese.
tree in the way. The best I could do. Anyway, the roof is installed on the house next door. The floors, as you've seen walking through.
They look really nice.
Don't they look
They do,
amazing?
they're very
Nice.
sweet.
Very nice floors. We talked about the transportation claim likely being a little bit lower. Like I said at last week's, or last meeting, I'm kind of breaking this into the 5 functions of the business office. So from an HR perspective, just letting you know that we've gotten all of our new hires on board. Food services, the menus are set. This year we will have a full salad bar, so more fresh veggies and fruits available for the students this year, which is great. And I looked at the menu and the recipes look pretty darn good. It's different from last year, so I'm excited to see what this year holds. On the finance side, I submitted the site-based expenditure report. So this is something that's done each year. Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, this goes onto our school report card, correct? Some of the data?
Yes.
So essentially, we're pulling all of the expenditures from the previous fiscal year, broken out by building location, and that gives us a number of per pupil expenditures essentially. And it's just to have conversations, give us a snapshot of what our expenditures look like. And then the very end there is just the budget calendar, which we've seen. And that is it. That's it.
Thank you. Does any board member have any reports?
I survived the kindergarten welcoming tonight.
Oh.
Fight people off, yeah.
Should've worn your board shirt.
I should have. Scared teacher.
They know who you are. I've emailed them on the personal and then they send it back on my board. I'm like, no, I was asking about my kid. I was not talking about a board member. But I hope your kid enjoys kindergarten.
I think so.
We need a closed session, right?
We do.
What do we need it for? I don't have the list.
Negotiations. So
Remember one, but
two, I think you- oh, boy.
Bless you.
I think we should really sign up on that.
I do, but I'm supposed to read it out loud.
The special thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a list of things.
Collective negotiations, I think it's the second one.
Sorry, my bad.
I'm sure I got it ready. We need drawing.
Yeah, Veronica would have had it.
Ronnie,
Where is she?
you know, man.
She said she doesn't like us anymore.
No.
Where's the list? See, it never comes up when I look for it. I had brought my whole thing with me, I had it too. Mhm. We have a pretty long medicine.
Excited for middle school.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same people, so she's, I think so. I think she's, hasn't quite hit her yet.
Not nervous about changing classrooms.
No, not at all. At least, not to dad.
Right.
Mom. Not dad.
I could see her just rolling with it though.
Yeah, that's how she is.
Yeah.
Yours.
Isla is afraid of,
This way.
yeah, like for some reason it's very stressful.
See you guys.
See you.
Bye, guys.
And Davey is excited for kindergarten.
Oh, Davey's like, I want to be in school already. Like, yeah, just wait till you're.
All right, I make a motion that we, move into closed meeting for the purpose of collective negotiation matters between public body and its employees or their representatives or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees.
Second.
Roll call.
John,
Yes.
Mr. Lorenzen,
And you can only.
Mr. Murphy,
Oh, no, I'm not
Yes.
even good with this one.
Mr. Federini,
Yes.
Ms. Roberts,
Yes.
Ms. Boss,
Yes.
Mr. Coleman,
Present.
Mr. Guziak.
Present.
We are now going in closed session. If you're watching online, we're not gonna do anything when we come back, just close the regular open session. So, thank you very much. Does anybody need to take a break real quick?